Hi, I'm Shoukang Chen. In this reflective video, I'll walk through the 5 creative responses I produced for Folio 1. Each week I explored a different theme, using various materials and digital techniques. I'll share my process, inspirations, and what I've learned from each piece, and reflect on how these experiences have shaped my creative direction. In week 1, we explored observation not just as a passive act of seeing, but as a deeply active and interpretive process. The lecture emphasized that observation involves all our senses, touch, sound, memory, emotion, and that each observation is shaped by our personal experiences and the cultural situation in which we encounter a thing. I created a short animation that transforms Chinese doctors' handwriting, often seen as messy and illegible, into electric energy. I imagined a world where writing creates current, captured by a capacitor, and used to light a lamp. This was my way of connecting traditional behaviors with modern technology. It also touches on the idea of association, where one sense vision leads to another electric motion. The work of Su Bing, especially the theater of gravity, was a strong influence. He also turns writing into systems of invisible force. His calligraphy and ink become subject to gravity, just as mind becomes electricity. In week 2, we focused on tinkering as a method, a way of working through playful exploration without rigid plans or final outcomes. The lecture encouraged us to work immediately with what's at hand, combine unfamiliar materials, and let unexpected patterns emerge through repetition and improvisation. This open-ended approach really shaped how I started the week's work. I began with something familiar, human portraits, but allowed myself to experiment freely with how the lines behaved and transformed across layers. There was no strict goal, just a curiosity about what could happen if I pushed the contours beyond recognition. I used Adobe Illustrator to extract facial contour lines and then layered them in Photoshop to form vein-like textures. These textures eventually became part of a macro image of a tree leaf. Here, I explored the visual relationship between humans and nature. I used digital tools to blur the line between anatomy and botany. This technique allowed me to experiment with how small, formal changes can completely shift meaning. I was inspired by Giuseppe Pannoni, who links skin, veins, and tree bark in his Tree Skin and Veins series. His work helped me frame my idea as a fusion of identity and landscape. Week 3, found objects. I used a photograph of an ice cube tray and overlaid it with green-tinted video of melting ice. The footage was shot using a small camera and chroma keyed into place. The melting became a metaphor for impermanence or silent disappearance. No dialogue, no characters, just slow change. I thought of Pipolati Rist's Ever is Over All, where everyday scenes feel emotional through rhythm and composition. Also, Duchamp's Fountain reminds me how simple objects can hold deeper meaning when we shift their context. In week 4, we discussed the role of place not just as a passive background, but as a central narrative force. The idea that the environment is the character, and the character is the environment, really influenced how I approached my work. The lecture challenged us to think beyond figure and ground, to see how space itself can hold memory, identity, or tension even without any characters present. I designed a surreal 3D candy shop using Cinema 4D. It looks cute and nostalgic on the surface, but with pastel fog, strange lighting, and floating clouds, it becomes unsettling. The shop becomes a character representing distorted memory or repressed emotion. I used dreamcore and liminal space theory to create this contrast. I was inspired by Kid Gorgeous, who builds comforting but eerie digital spaces. Also, the game Journey uses space itself as a narrative force, and I wanted to try something similar in my 3D practice. In week 5, we were introduced to object-oriented ontology, which proposes that objects are not defined or exhausted by their usefulness to humans. Instead, they possess their own agency, presence, and capacity for meaning beyond function or intention. This shifted how I viewed everyday things. I started thinking about discarded objects, not as waste, but as beings with their own quiet existence. What happens when we pay attention to what we usually overlook? This became the starting point for my response. Oriented ontology, I took a photo of a discarded Coke can, sitting quietly among broken desks in my university. I titled it The New Home of an Empty Coke Can. By shifting the object's context, I suggested that even trash can occupy space, have presence, and hold memory. The object is no longer functional but still speaks. This idea connects to Takeda Dean's Flow series. She shows how forgotten images and objects can quietly ask us to reflect on value and visibility. Reflection. Across this folio, a theme that emerged for me is the transformation of meaning. Whether through writing, melting, or spatial composition, I learned that everything, no matter how ordinary, can shift. Speak and surprise. My favorite piece was from week 3. The slow melt of ice felt like time itself, passing gentle, unnoticed, but irreversible. That moment made me realize that art can whisper, not just shout. Moving forward, I plan to keep experimenting with subtle change, metaphor, and quiet emotion. I'm especially interested in using video and photography to highlight objects that are overlooked but never meaningless. This folio helped me refine my technical process, research deeper into the field, and strengthen my creative voice. Thank you for watching.